Thanks to all of you for joining us, and thanks for your service on behalf of our country. It's deeply appreciated. Secretary Hagel, the administration has yet to make an OCO request. I believe because the President has yet to make a determination as to the specifics regarding a residual force in Afghanistan. Now, estimates that we hear on what might remain in Afghanistan run along a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, we hear high estimates suggesting there might be 10,000 troops or so remaining after the withdrawal. Others suggest that it might be closer to zero. But even at the higher end of these estimates, if it were, let's say, at the 10,000 range, this would still represent nearly a two-thirds decrease in our presence in Afghanistan next year. So can we expect, in light of that, to see a corresponding decrease in the OCO request for next year?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. I'm going to ask the Comptroller to answer the specifics, because that part of the budget, the overseas contingency part of the budget, has many things in it. There are readiness issues and so on. It isn't just Afghanistan, as you know. Yes, obviously we are waiting, you've correctly noted it, to see what we get some better clarity on what the future post-2014 role might be. But let me ask the Comptroller to go a little deeper.
Sure. A decrease, but not proportional, Senator Lee. And as Secretary Hagel said, there are items in there that won't come down in proportion to boots on the ground. Reset, fixing equipment as it comes out. Afghan National Security Forces are possibilities, and there are others as well. So I'm not prepared to give you a number. It will come down, but I wouldn't expect it to be proportional.
Okay. Secretary Hagel, you've outlined some very specific reductions in end strength within the Army, its reserve units, and within the Marine Corps. You're a little less specific on your reductions to Department of Defense civilian employees and civilian contractors. Can you give us an update on your plan to cut 20% of major headquarters operating budgets and other ways of making cuts in civilian personnel?
Yes, and we can give you a very detailed progress report, which we can give your staff a briefing on. But to answer your question, as you know, General Dempsey and I both led the effort for all headquarters across the world, Joint Service, Combatant Command, obviously starting with my office. That plan is underway. That plan is progressing. We are continuing to follow it out. And the specifics of it, I'd be glad to give you the more detailed report.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
May I add briefly on the civilian full-time equivalents? They'll come down about 5%, Senator Lee, from 14 to 19. So they are coming down. We need your help here. The way to cut civilians is BRAC, because if you get rid of a BCT, you don't get rid of civilians. You close the base where they work. If you no longer need it, then you can get rid of them. So if we're going to see sustained reductions, we need your help in allowing us to close unneeded infrastructure.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, the recent action by Russia in Crimea is alarming, and it's part of a series of disappointments that we've seen since the Russian reset. You know, between the Syrian crisis, the situation with Edward Snowden, repeated INF violations by Russia, and now we've got this situation in Ukraine. We've had a disappointing series of setbacks with Russia as it relates to our relationship with Russia. I want to talk to you a little bit about energy policy and how this might factor into that. It's of concern to me that some of the countries, including many of the democracies in many parts of the world, that should be more inclined to stand up to Russia, or perhaps not in a position to do so, because of the fact that they're heavily dependent on Russia for their energy needs, given their dependence on Russian-produced oil and natural gas. Don't you think that it would be in the national security interests of the United States to open up our domestic production of oil and natural gas, specifically for purposes related to our national security, such that if we could open up our own production of oil and natural gas and make sure that we're able to export those commodities to a significant degree in the international market, the government in Russia, the plutocracy in Russia that's funded by this dependence on Russian oil and natural gas, wouldn't that help ameliorate this problem?
Well, the short-term crisis that we're dealing with, Senator, is probably not going to be ameliorated with that dimension. However, your larger point is an important one about energy and production of energy. And it's not insignificant that North America is going to be essentially, as we fulfill the capabilities of our technology, essentially the #1 producer of energy in the world. As to the markets and opening that up and what kind of leverage does it give us or not give us on relationships with Russia or anyone else, I mean, markets always, as you know, and economics always dictate different dynamics of any foreign policy equation.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Secretary, in light of the deterioration of our relationship with Russia, as I've just described, will the United States continue to pursue a new nuclear weapons treaty with Russia, as the President outlined in his speech in Berlin last June?
We're pursuing compliance with the New START treaty. There is no new treaty. I mean, the New START treaty is the one treaty that we're
Any new reductions in our nuclear forces?
I think the President has made clear that that would be not unilateral. We would do it in conjunction, as we have in all past reductions with
But I assume you would agree that recent events would give us certain pause in approaching that relationship.
Certainly, but I think you always start where this President has started, I think every President, with the Ronald Reagan theme of trust but verify.
Yeah.
That's why you have verification procedures in place for all these treaties, which are critical.
I understand. I understand, and I would add only that given their failure to comply with the agreements that we've got, I've got significant concerns about that. But I see my time's expired. I thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.